Hi there, I'm Brother Merrill, and this is Sunshine for the Soul Inspirational Stories. I wanted to thank everyone who watches the channel and leaves comments. I recently decided to demonetize the channel, so I'm no longer running ads. Several people have asked me if I would re-release some of my favorite stories without the advertisements. I also wanted to thank Jake at Family History Storybooks. He's doing a storybook about my great-great-grandfather, Mariner Wood Merrill. He will write the stories for you. I've chosen to write the dialogue myself. If you just give him the name of one of your ancestors, he does these beautiful illustrated storybooks so that you can share the stories of your ancestors with your progenitors. Hi there. This is Sunshine for the Soul with Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. I am honored today to share the story of Sam Thomas with you. He reached out to me in the comments of one of my videos and told me a little bit about his story, and we've been in touch with one another, and it is an amazing story, and I'm really honored that Sam would let me be the one to tell it. Sam is a returned missionary. He lives in Blackfoot, Idaho. He served in Bogota, Colombia. After his mission, he returned home and he married his sweetheart, Isa. She is also from Colombia. They had a real miracle just getting her a visa so they could be married in the Salt Lake Temple. They were going to school up in Portland. Sam had gotten his private pilot's license. His life goal was to become a commercial airline pilot. And in order to do that, you need to not only be a licensed pilot, but you have to amass a great deal of airtime in a variety of aircraft. They finished the semester, and Sam began to drive a semi-truck, which he had had experience since before he had a driver's license driving a semi. So he was driving a truck, but he wasn't making enough money to really save a substantial amount where he could pay for the air hours that he needed. But he heard some men at work talking about their friends that were over working in Iraq as drivers. They were doing exactly what they were doing, but they were making huge money. And Sam decided that that's what he wanted to do. So he got the name of the company that did it, KBR, out of Houston, Texas, and he began to monitor their website. Every time a job notice came up, he applied, but he soon determined that they preferred ex-military people to drive for them because of the situation in Iraq. But not to be deterred, he continued to apply, and finally he decided the only way I'm going to get a job with them is if they can meet me and see who I am and what I'm like. When the semester ended, he and his wife talked about it, and they agreed that that's what he should do. And he took the last $400 that he had in the world, and he bought a ticket to Houston, and he went to the KBR headquarters and prevailed on them to give him a job. He got the job. They put him through a 2-week classroom training course, and then he went back home and was going to leave for Baghdad. He had heard a lot of horror stories about people and drivers in Baghdad, and he knew it was extremely, extremely dangerous. They were attending a Spanish-speaking branch in Portland, and he asked his branch president to give him a blessing. And the branch president told him in that blessing, "The Lord will hold you in his hand and protect you, and he will bring you back safely to your wife." So armed with that promise, Sam left. When he arrived in Baghdad, it was 130 degrees. He soon determined that there were only 2 types of people in Iraq besides the military and the people over there working. There were friendlies, and they would only throw rocks and bottles and debris at you, and there were hostiles, which were actively trying to kill you. And on his first run with the convoy, a haji is what they call everything over there. They call the people hajis, the way they dress haji, the way they drive haji, the way they live haji. And so Sam said a haji took a board, like a 3x3 post and threw it at him. And it came right through his windshield and stuck in the seat next to him. But he had also learned that you do not stop when the convoy's rolling. You keep rolling. Because if you stop, you're going to die. And when he got back to the base with this board sticking out the front of his truck, they said, man, that guy's tough. And everybody over there went by nicknames. No one even knew each other's real names. And that way, if they were captured and tortured, they would not divulge any personal information about any of the people in their unit. It was an extremely dangerous situation. During the time that we had drivers and professional people over in Iraq, over 600 drivers were killed, and many more were injured or crippled by the attacks of the enemy over there. They hauled over 1 million gallons of gasoline a day to different places in Iraq. So they were constantly on the road. They frequently had to go 24 or 30 hours without sleep, and they would always log at least 90 or 100 hours a week driving. One time, Sam had to actually stay awake and drive for 70 hours straight. That's almost 3 days. And that week he logged over 130 hours in his logbook driving. They would frequently be ambushed, or they would run into traffic that was at a standstill. And when that happened, they had a practice that they called going haji. And what that meant was they would jump the divide, get on the wrong side of the freeway, and drive full speed, all 20 rigs, one right after the other, going down the freeway the wrong direction, and everybody would just get out of their way. And they found that during rush hour, that was the fastest way to go. They could make a lot better time. So the company commander, which usually rode in the front truck with his own driver, and he'd sit in the passenger seat, keeping track of things, communicating, and taking care of business. If he called out on the radio, we're going haji, everybody knew they had to lock in the differentials, they had to gear down, rev up, and jump the barrier. And some of the barriers were pretty big, but that's just the way it was over there. They continued to haul fuel for quite a while. Sam was over there over 3 years. And then Sam was transferred. It came at a time when the military was taking a lot of old equipment out of Iraq, and they were bringing a bunch of new equipment. It was landing in Kuwait, and then they were going from Kuwait and driving up the most dangerous road in the world. They called it the main supply route, the MSR. There were more people killed on that road than anywhere else in the world at the time. The MSR bypassed Baghdad, because if you went into Baghdad, it was suicide. You would not probably come out alive. People were killed all the time in Baghdad. There was a bypass there called Sword and Shield. And the beginning of Sword and Shield was marked with an intersection that was Alpha 59. And right before you got to Alpha 59, there weren't road signs like we have here in the United States. There was a footbridge. All the drivers knew that right after that footbridge, you turned on the Sword and you bypassed the area of Baghdad. And they were hauling at night because that was the safest time for them. They were always escorted by an armed military escort that had multiple vehicles, and they were in a small convoy themselves. And they would go through and clear any insurgents or road hazards that they deemed impassable that they could find out of the way. Everyone soon learned that you stayed exactly in the tracks of the truck in front of you. Because if his tires had not hit a mine, your tires would not hit a mine. And so that's how they proceeded. The company mechanic that followed each convoy was in a little single-axle bobtail truck, and he was the last truck. Their convoy mechanic had requested that Sam always be the last truck, because he knew Sam would not leave him. This one night, as they were bringing back equipment on their flatbed trucks, 20 trucks in the convoy, their convoy commander was Panther. One of Sam's best friends was driving for him, Roadrunner. The footbridge that marked Alpha 59 intersection had been blown up, and they missed it. Meantime, the armed military escort that was to accompany them had made a wrong turn. And so Panther got on the radio and said, "We've lost our escort, let's just keep going." As they approached the bridge, Sam saw that the bridge was gone, and the entire convoy was now 2 miles ahead of him, and they were in Baghdad. And he got on the radio and he said, "Panther, you've missed the turn. I'm at Alpha 59, the bridge has been blown out." And the convoy commander came back on the radio and he said, "We're going dark. Everybody lock him in. We're going Haggai." And he said, "Tough," that was Sam's nickname, "Tough, you've got to get us out of here." And at that moment, a very clear voice in the seat next to Sam said, "What happens next will determine if you and your friends live or die." And he turned, and there was no one there. And then the whole convoy began to struggle to lock in the differentials and gear down and rev up. And in this particular spot, there was a 2-foot concrete barricade in the road. And at that moment, Sam had an amazing experience. Most folks have never had an out-of-body experience. So imagine for a moment that you are in another dimension, a 4th or 5th dimension, if you count time as the 4th dimension, and that you can see into all 3 dimensions and time all at once. At the moment that the convoy commander told Sam he had to get them out of there, he suddenly found his spirit and his awareness above his truck. He could see his body struggling to get turned around. He could see everything. He was aware of every driver, like he was in the cab with them. He could feel their feelings. He could see all the houses go dark and all the residents fleeing. He could see insurgents rushing towards them with RPGs and machine guns, getting in position to kill them. Everything was dark. The whole convoy turned around. He could see the bodies of the different drivers being tossed as they crashed over this 2-foot concrete barrier. And miraculously, not one truck snagged, stalled, broke a rim, broke an axle, split a tire or anything. All of them got turned around. And now Sam was in front of the convoy. And at that moment, the entire convoy was illuminated. And out in front, he could see the exact path, the tire tracks that he had to follow to get them out. And his body obediently followed his will as he was aware of the whole 2-mile convoy and all the people around it. And they drove out. And they finally reached safety. Sam returned to his body, and it was just shaking all over. He'd been spiritually charged and dosed with a huge dose of adrenaline, as all the other drivers and the commander had been. But every man in that convoy that night knew that they had been delivered by the hand of the Lord, that they had been kept safe. Every 4 months in Baghdad, the drivers were given a 2-week paid vacation and a ticket round trip to anywhere in the world. And so Sam would come home to his wife, who was going to school in Orem, Utah. While he was home trying to retool, he would buy as many Arabic Book of Mormons as he could comfortably take back with him. And then he'd leave them scattered around in different places. Technically, they couldn't proselyte or talk to people about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any other Christian religion. But those Book of Mormons just seemed to disappear, and people who were interested in them took them and read them. Sam tried to actively represent the church as he lived his life over there in a way that was honoring his priesthood. Sam and his friend Lighthouse were flown into the BTC, the Baghdad Transport Center, where they would be assigned to flights that would take them to a location where they'd bring a new piece of equipment, a new truck, new flatbed, new tanker, whatever they needed. They'd drive it back to a certain location, and then they'd fly back. At the BTC, they had just dozens of rows of these 60 by 10 foot prefab units that were broken into 10-foot sections, and each 10-foot section had a bedroom set up in it with 4 beds. So there were 2 bunks on each side. And when they got to the center, they were given a key and they were given bedding. And they carried a bug-out bag with them that had their personal belongings. And so Lighthouse and Sam were flown into BTC, and they were waiting until they could get a flight to the location that they needed to go to. Sometimes they'd be there 2 or 3 days in that situation because people who were scheduled for R&R got priority treatment. The first night they got there, they went and got food at the dining area, and the dining area was separate, as were the bathrooms. As they were walking back towards their hooch, that's what they called the bedroom they had, all of a sudden they heard a kind of a hissing, humming sound above them, and they didn't look around to see what it was. They just dove into the ground, and the ground was about 6 inches deep of just fine dust like flour. And as they turned and looked, they saw 2 missiles go overhead that looked like telephone poles flying low over their heads, and they went and crashed in not far away, and they heard them explode and felt the rock of the explosion, and it was quite a hair-raising experience. They got up and dusted themselves off, and Sam said, I'm just going to go back to the hooch. And Lighthouse said, I'm going to go see what's playing at the movies. And so he went down to the recreation center to see what was playing. But meantime, Sam went back to their hooch, and he climbed up the 3 metal steps and across the little landing. And as he tried to close the door, it wouldn't latch properly. It sprung the frame of the door a little bit, so he had to really lean into it to get it to close and lock. And so he sat down on his bunk and was reading the Book of Mormon, and he heard the door unlocking, and Lighthouse came in and sat down and on the bunk opposite of him and said, what are you reading? And Sam, being a returned missionary, he knew this was a chance to tell this good Christian guy about the Book of Mormon. And he told him this is a record, a religious record of the ancient people of America. And it contains a visitation of Jesus Christ to them after his resurrection. And they talked a little about religion, and maybe it was a combination of that religious discussion or the scare of those rockets roaring overhead and exploding. But Lighthouse began to get a little melancholy, and he confided in Sam. He said, I'm not going to make it out of here. He said, this was a stupid thing to do. He said, it's so dangerous over here. He said, I had all these debts. I felt like this was the only way to get out of it, to take care of my family. It was just reckless. I think I'm on my own over here. I don't think I'm going to survive. And Sam held up the Book of Mormon. He said, this book contradicts what you believe. He said, it's full of stories of men and people who were defending their families and their freedoms, and God protected them, and he brought them back home to their families, and he blessed them. There were men that lived and men that died by the sword, but they were in the Lord's hands. And then he began to teach him about the Holy Ghost, because the Spirit became really strong in the room. He told him the Spirit of the Holy Ghost will bear witness to you of truth, and you can recognize truth from error. You can know what's right and what's wrong. And the Spirit got strong, and he looked at him and said, that feeling you have right now is the Holy Ghost bearing record to your soul that what I'm telling you is true. And Lighthouse was really touched. Sam told him, the Holy Ghost will speak to your mind and to your heart. It will guide you and direct you and protect you. You have to listen to it. It was getting late, so after the discussion they turned in, and the next morning Sam was aroused by the sound of people walking around outside, and he woke up and he looked, and Lighthouse was sitting on his bunk opposite, just staring at him. It's like he's staring right through him. He goes, "Hey, what's up? Are you okay?" And Lighthouse looked at him and said, "You know that Holy Ghost that you told me about last night? That Holy Ghost saved your life last night." And then he told him that in the dark hours of the morning, he needed to go to the bathroom. So he got up and he got his flashlight and got his sandals, and he was walking down the rows of the hooches. As he started to walk, a voice said very clearly to him in his mind, "What you just did will kill Sam." He just kind of thought, and he just kept walking. And again, the voice came into his mind saying, "What you just did will kill Sam." And he just kept walking, and he turned the corner and was walking along, and all of a sudden he heard a voice behind him say, "What you just did will kill your friend Sam." And he turned, and there was no one there. And all of a sudden an urgent feeling came over him, and he turned and ran back around the corner to the hooch. And Lighthouse was a big guy, well over 6 feet tall, and big husky guy. And there on the landing above the steps of their hooch, an Iraqi had their door open, and his arm was pulled back, and he had a black canvas bag and was just getting ready to throw it into the room where Sam was asleep. And when he saw this huge guy running towards him, he turned and fled into the darkness. The next day, the MPs found a black canvas bag filled with explosives, and they speculated that one of the citizens that were allowed in the wire on base there had brought in explosives and was going to probably throw it into the movie house, but there weren't many people in there that night. He had just selected their room, but they were the only two that knew about it. But that day, the Holy Ghost bore witness to Lighthouse that the Spirit of the Lord will guide and direct and protect. The Lord loves you. The Lord loves me. The Lord loves Sam and brought him home. He's living up in Blackfoot, Idaho with his wife and his son and trying to do what's right. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. The Lord still loves you no matter what you've done. And he will guide and direct your life for good, not only for the good of the world, but for your good. He wants you to be happy, and he will guide you to that happiness. And even though Sam didn't become an airline pilot like he thought he wanted to be, he's working in a great place, he's doing great work, and he's got a wonderful family. I hope you've enjoyed this story. It's an amazing story. Again, Sam, I thank you for letting me share it. This has been Sunshine for the Soul. Please subscribe. If you liked this story, you may enjoy this one. There's quite a few stories on Sunshine for the Soul. You can find them here. Thanks again.